you for being you, and thank you for watching. We're gonna get started with our next episode of Chessemplation. I'm gonna see if I'm live. I should be live. Yes, indeed. I am. Cool. Sweet. Okay, well, in Facebook, it still says I'm doing a series on literary theory, and that's true. This specific episode is going to be a continuation of my Chessemplation episodes, but yeah, let's go ahead and get back to my notes here. So, since the last time I did a Chessemplation episode, which was pretty recently, I have done still more classical studies, master's class assignments. I have paid more money for surgery bills, which is as fun as it could possibly be. I also did a 10-mile bike ride pretty recently. I think it was this past Tuesday. And I'm so excited that my girlfriend, Caitlin, is moving closer to me in a few days. Hopefully, maybe around Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm so excited. Recently, too, I've started a Patreon, so do go check that out. I also have a Facebook business page, which I've been improving. And I also have a link tree, so you can see pretty much all of my socials in one fell swoop. Particularly, I've got a new Instagram business account, I've got a new blog, and I've got SoundCloud. And I have plans to eventually publish more music via Spotify, but at any rate, let me go ahead and introduce the title for tonight / this morning. This is going to be called "Oh Logic, Do I See Always?" This is a continuation to my introduction to the instrumental music controversy. And before I move on, I want to say I went through several phases of trying to title this episode. First, it was going to be something about logic and caution, safety, and rest. Then it became, oh, logic, do I see both ways? Like, as if I'm crossing a street, do I look at both sides of the road before I go? And then I started thinking, in arguments, there are probably more than two ways to view a topic, so why don't I just expand the title of this episode to include that much more circumspect picture? So that's what this episode is titled, and I think it's going to be a fun episode. And what better way to celebrate the beginning of November? At this point, I'm going to take out my pitch pipe here. I'm trying to get the pitch to align with the basic key of this tune that we're listening to. And the pitch pipe right here is a very important memento in my life. We're going to be talking about Churches of Christ with relation to the instrumental music controversy. And we're also going to be doing some chess games too. So before I dive more deeply into what we're going to get into, let's just go ahead and play some chess games. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh my chess page here. And while I'm at it, I should probably move for some of my daily games. So I'm going to go over to this one right here. Okay, so bishop to g5. Okay, I'm thinking let's just push this pawn up here. Yeah. And then for this game, let's see here. I'd like to get a rook over to the b file, but I also want to protect that pawn. This pawn structure is headed up this way. My knight still hasn't been taken, and these pawns are doubled. I don't want to move this pawn forward because I'd like to be able to capture this back if I need to. Okay, well, I guess to kill some time, I could probably go right here for now. Oh, there we go. Perfect. And then let's do this other game. Let's check, do I want to take with my pawn or do I want to take with my queen? Let's see. Likely gonna castle kingside, probably. If my c pawn takes, then I probably don't want to castle queenside. Might want to castle kingside. On the other hand, I might just want to keep that pawn on the c file. That might actually work out better for me. So I think I'll go ahead and take with my queen. Okay, then I've got this other game here. Bishop and knight combo. So let's see. Need to do something to defend this spot here. So, quickest move I can think of is going right there. And then, got this other game I'm balancing. Got a doubled pawn structure right there. This knight is just hanging out. Moment. If the pawn takes, that's no big deal, and the reason why the pawn is there anyway is because he wants to keep that knight right there. So what if I just move up here, see what he does after that. Okay, then I've got this other game too. Oh, good. Just took that knight. So I'm going to go ahead and take this back. Okay. And then I got this game too. So I'm launching a kingside attack. Got the queen and rook doubled up on this e pawn. And then I do want to keep pushing here. So, yeah, I think I will. I'll keep pushing here. Cool. And while I'm at it, I'm going to play some more quick 1-minute chess games, and then we'll get back to the topic that we're going to be exploring. So, here we go. Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Could have taken the pawn. Interesting that he didn't. Okay, castling over here. Gonna move my rook over here. Gonna move this over there for now. Then I'm gonna, for the fun of it, go right there. Okay. Then, let's see here. Move back. Okay. Here. Go up there. Okay. Ooh, that ain't good. Oh, haha. Okay, all right. Wheel. Yeah, I was going way too slow. Okay, so let's do a fresh game, but instead let's do 2 minutes. Yeah. Take this jazz. This lo-fi jazz. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okie dokie. Queen probably would want to go right there. Because if the queen can get down here, yeah. I'll just go over here so that when that happens, I don't have to be totally caught by surprise. Nope, don't want to do that. I'll go right here. And so that when this happens, just come up here. Okay, in the chat, somebody asks how I'm doing. Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good for right now. Okay, I'm gonna have to go over here. Hope you're having a good night. Okay. Now for this, we're just gonna go ahead and defend this spot. Except that's not a good idea because of that bishop. I keep forgetting about that bishop. Okay. And then why not? So that means I have to move this. Which means I'm gonna go there. Take that. Go up here. Okay. Okay. Should have taken that bishop. I'm gonna take that now. Okay. Oops. Okay, and then let's come up here. Ooh, okay. Well. Right. Shouldn't have done that because he can just take. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oops. Come on. Oops. Oops. Okay. Okay. Well, whew, man. Let's go ahead and do another one. I gotta get back up to where I was before. Okay. No, let's not do that right now. Let's go up here. Hmm. That queen could have just gone up there, and that would have not been good. Hmm. Queen can just go right there. Oh, he can just go right there, can he? Oh well. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on with the rest of what I had planned to talk about, and then we'll play some more chess games. Let's see. I want to see. Okay, cool. Cool. All right. Let's go ahead and continue on with what I had hoped to talk about. So, I come from the context of churches of Christ, and in particular, we're going to analyze some things that I had heard growing up, and hopefully get a better understanding of some historical background for the instrumental music controversy as it exists in places like the Churches of Christ. So in-house, the rhetoric is that we like to be just like the first century church that you read about in Acts. to some extent, I think it's safe to say that a lot, or virtually all, of professing Christians seek to embody what they believe to be the in keeping with the original church. And so whenever we get to my particular background, I would suggest that if we look at figures like Alexander Campbell, he was a pivotal person in the 19th century Stone Campbell restoration movement that we were talking about in the previous episode. And if we just take him as one example of representative, we'll learn that he was influenced by Enlightenment common sense philosophy that sprung from John Locke, who was a philosopher. And furthermore, Alexander Campbell and others like him were influenced by the empiricism and inductive reasoning methodologies promoted by Francis Bacon, who is another philosopher. And I would suggest to you that Alexander Campbell and others like him were ultimately shaped by the regulative principle of biblical interpretation as had been expressed by people like John Calvin. In the previous episode, we talked a little bit about what the regulative principle is like. And there are tons of descriptions you can find online, but basically, it's the view that God commands churches to conduct public services of worship using certain distinct elements affirmatively found in Scripture. And conversely, that God prohibits any and all other practices in public worship. So, if you'd like another description of this, you could even specify regulative versus normative. This is a pretty good AI overview. The regulative principle of worship states that worship should be directed by Scripture, and that only things explicitly prescribed in Scripture should be permitted. Whereas the normative principle of worship states that only things that are prohibited in Scripture should be prohibited, and that anything not prohibited is permitted so long as it is in agreement with the general practice of the church. So, regulative principle would say, if the Bible says it, we should do it. And if the Bible is silent about something, you should take that silence as prohibitive. Whereas the normative principle would say, what's the general practice of the church throughout history? And if there's a place where the Bible is silent on this or that, we should not take that as necessarily prohibitive, but could be prohibitive, could be permissive. So normative would be would approach the Bible more from like a case-by-case perspective. Okay. Anyway, in the previous video, I had shown that when I was younger, when I was a teenager, I would spend so many nights and days rehashing this argument, that other argument, on and on and on and on. I would write up, let's see, how long is this thing? I would write up like 115 page long treatises of these arguments, trying to figure out which came first. The a cappella only strand of argument, or perhaps that wasn't the earliest set of arguments to come on the scene. So I was just a very curious kid. And before it gets lost in the sauce, I want to say Missing More Than Music is probably one of my favorite books on this topic that we're going to be talking about. So in this episode, we're going to continue reading through this first installment in this series of articles. We left off at this line here, but before we get into continuing from where we left off, I think it's really important for us to delve into a brief introduction of what we talked about before. Okay. And before I actually do that, I need to ask some two tangential questions before they get further lost. So, here goes. Since Church of Christ hymnals are inclusive of hymns written by women and not just men, and since hymns evoke doctrines or teachings, I think we should take a moment to pause and think, why should women in churches of Christ be excluded or excused from formal Church of Christ leadership positions? Because you would think that hymns, in that they contain doctrines and teachings, is a pretty formal thing. So a little bit of consistency might be a good thing. If you are thoroughly opposed to women in ministry, and if that's what you say all the time, and your actions don't line up with your words necessarily, I think there's reason to think about your consistency. Personally, while I respect people who articulate robust arguments for complementarianism, think egalitarianism and equality between men and women is the more solid way to go. That's just my personal take, and I could get into that later, but anyway, my second question is this. Since Church of Christ hymnals tend to be inclusive of hymns written by non-Church of Christ folks, why should we exclude or excuse ourselves, who are within Churches of Christ, from formally worshiping with non-Church of Christ folks? I think this is a very pertinent question, because Dr. Richard Beck, for instance, once suggested that there are Church of Christ groups that are more ecumenical minded, meaning coming together, uniting with other people. And then there are others who are more sectarian, in the sense that they tend to want to just hang out in this little bubble and not necessarily acknowledge their own church history and how they fit within a much larger global picture. Between those two views of history, the sectarian side and the ecumenical side, I would suggest that the ecumenical has the more circumspect view of reality. That would just be my suggestion. And we should go ahead and quickly go through some things that were in that I meant to touch on within the previous video, because the author brought up quite a lot of phrases in quick succession that we didn't have time to unpack. So each entry in this series that we're going to be delving into is a highly sarcastic piece of literature. The instrumental music representative is written to talk as forcefully as an a cappella only representative might usually do. Also, the writer of the series came from an a cappella only background, but over time began to think that instrumental music could be just legitimate a way to worship God as doing a cappella only. In the previous episode, we might have mentioned Dr. Edward Fudge, who was a Church of Christ dude who argued for a conditionalist, annihilationist perspective of hell rather than eternal conscious torment. And Edward Fudge was a lawyer by profession. Jay Gwynn, who we're going to be reading from, also happened to be a lawyer. In the piece we're going to be continuing reading from here, you're going to notice mentioning the Christian Chronicle. That comes up at least once or twice. So the Christian Chronicle is a Church of Christ newspaper, and you can easily Google that and see what that basically looks like. Along the way, the author of this article mentions Ephesians 5:18 through 21, and whenever I bring up passages like this, I like to bring up the Greek and the Chinese, as well as the Latin and German, and then the English as well, because I like getting a more rounded view of these developments. Oh yeah, along the way, the author of this article uses the term proof passage. In other words, proof texting is the method by which a person appeals to a biblical text to prove or justify a theological position without regard for the context of the passage that they are citing. So if you're in the habit of just like, constantly ripping this or that passage from its context, what you're doing is most likely proof texting rather than careful scholarly academic study of a passage that then you quote a specific part from. Along the way, the writer mentions the Septuagint, and the Septuagint, as Catholics would say, is the first translation of the Hebrew Old Testament made into popular Greek before the Christian era. Now, Catholics and Orthodox have a much larger conception of the scriptures than do Protestants and Restorationists typically. So it's sort of helpful to think about there being a Hebrew or Palestinian or Masoretic tradition for the Old Testament specifically, and then a Greek or Alexandrian or Septuagint Vulgate version. Now, this latter version right here contains a few more books than in the Old Testament than this version does. This is the version that often gets used in Protestant and Restorationist circles, whereas this longer version is the one that tends to get used in Catholic and Orthodox spaces. It's an important thing to know, I think. Along the way, in the previous episode, we heard the mention of Psalm 150, 2 through 6. And fun fact, the Vulgate often has different numbering systems than the rest of these others. So that's something to be very careful about when you're entering in texts into the search engine. So this is an example of a proof text. This is another example of a proof text. And you'll notice this is a case in point. You're not going to be able to find 66 there. Okay, I gotta force quit some things. Let's force quit that. Let's force quit preview. Let's force quit QuickTime. Or actually, yeah, let's force quit QuickTime. Cool. So you're going to find that what in these other versions you would enter in as Psalm 66 in the Vulgate is actually labeled as 65. I'm going to close some of these tabs here. Okay. Along the way, Jake Wynn has a couple of these really spicy phrases that I would push back a little bit on, I would say. I think the danger of this thought right here is that you could very easily sound anti-Semitic, which I don't think is a good thing. And even though Catholics and Orthodox have their faults, some Catholics with the sex abuse scandals, I'm sure there are ones in the Orthodox as well. But even though you have bad behavior, I wouldn't be so quick to say that every idea that they've ever said is off color or heretical or wrong for humanity. And then at one point, Jake Wynn had a character saying, I have no idea what first century music was like, but I know that modern instrumental music can be the furthest thing from animalistic. Some is deeply spiritual, much more spiritual than some of that Stamps Baxter quartet music you made me listen to the other week. I'd push back on using the term animalistic, although I get that it's rooted in a very traditional way of talking, like the Great Chain of Being, where you have like inanimate objects to animate objects to like, God at the top. Why speak so demeaningly about animals? Are all animals bad? And then further, Stamps Baxter, it refers to the work of Virgil Oliver Stamps. And this other dude, Jesse Randall Baxter. Both of these dudes created a music company that came to be known as Stamps Baxter Music Company, and they specialized in shape note Southern gospel music. In my experience, lots of Churches of Christ end up singing quite a few Stamps Baxter tunes, even though Stamps and Baxter were not necessarily from this Restoration Movement Church of Christ background. It's really, really interesting singing these songs, looking into the history, and then being like, why is there so much bad talk about denominations when we're singing denominational music? I think it's a worthwhile question. Further fun fact, at one point, Baxter got associated with the Southern Gospel Music Association, which historically had been resistant to racial integration. I'm not sure if it was that way by the time that he got in, but this is important history. And this academic paper looked cool. It was basically talking about how Stamps Baxter singing schools continued an earlier tradition of New England singing schools of the 18th century. So this, by just saying Stamps Baxter, this plants within a much larger garden of musical history. J. Gwynn also mentions the term solo, which is a Greek word that has a ton of historical baggage that we're not going to be able to get into tonight or today, but it's the subject of much vigorous debate in Christian circles. At one point, J. Gwynn has the characters say, "Oh, look at Strong's dictionary." And what you'll find is that, and Strong himself even said this, it's not actually a dictionary, but a concordance. It just maps a lot of passages together that have the same Hebrew or Greek word, but it is not a formal dictionary or you would say a lexicon. You can find better things like, for instance, this website here. You can just type in your word and then it will give you lexicon entries for each of these. You could also get yourself one of these. It's called the BDAG or BGAD, the Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature. I had one of these before I moved from Arkansas, and it's still sitting in storage, but it's a great book. I highly recommend it. Right, so those are some pretty good resources for learning about this term. But basically, if you were to look at the Logos Bible app, they would tell you that in the New Testament, solo meant something like sing and melody, but mostly sing. But again, this takes up a lot of conversation space in Christian circles. There are tons of articles, tons of books you could read from the a cappella only side. You could read this big old book right here. You could read any number of these articles here. And it's super interesting researching these topics further, how much like this non-instrumental, a cappella only, sectarian Church of Christ perspective, it's interesting how much this has in common with primitive Baptists, with Eastern Orthodox people. And to me, it's just mind-boggling why my own background doesn't necessarily want to fellowship with these other people who view things very similarly. To me, personally, it's a bit heartbreaking. Why not fellowship with the primitive Baptists and with other Reformed people? Why? But somebody would chime in and say, because they're denominational and we aren't. And I would have pushback on that. But you could also read O.E. Payne's book, which was in response to M.C. Curfey's thing, more or less. And this is a really, really interesting book here. We're not going to dive too deeply into this, but it's an interesting book. I did want to highlight these. The first one comes from a Presbyterian. The second one comes from a Baptist. The third one comes from another Presbyterian. And then there's this other person right here. In this first article here, this person suggests that the use of musical instruments as an aid to worship began prior to the law of Moses, and points out a number of other things in defense of using instruments in worship, which is a very relevant thing for our conversation right now. I would also suggest checking out this dude's article. And in particular, I like how he balances talking about the regulative principle and the normative principle that we were talking about earlier. At one point, he suggests that the regulative principle ensures what is essential and biblical is practiced in the worship service, and the normative principle allows liberty in implementing what is biblical. And he would say that how the biblical is practiced is not as essential as the what. Both should honor the Lord, not exalt man. But the a cappella only tradition in Churches of Christ, from what I can tell, pretty much just sticks with the regulative principle, or without calling it the regulative principle. This is also a good article, I thought. Actually, it's more than an article. It's a whole book. So I highly recommend taking a look at this. It looks like an amazing resource to check out. And then there's this other thing I wanted to bring up as well. In particular, I like how, again, this is a review of a Church of Christ related book. I like how this person challenges Ferguson's assertions and then goes on to specifically say his counter assertions. This person's counter assertions are these. 1. Musical worship forms in the Old Testament are not necessarily rendered obsolete by the new covenant in Christ. 2. In the absence of clear prohibitions or restrictions, the practices of the early church should be understood in their cultural context as descriptive and not prescriptive. And 3. The regulative principle, while useful, should not be viewed as absolute and comprehensive. Further, I like how this person says, okay, so you have the regulative principle, but who's going to regulate that principle? Is it democratic, like is every person in the congregation going to regulate that? Or only a certain subset of those people? Or a subset of a subset? This is very important. Studying the power dynamics is important for probably any religious or educational or political body that you might find. So, I went ahead and read all that, and we're not going to conclude quite yet because we're going to read more from this article right here. But before we read more from this, I'm going to go back to play some chess games. Now that I've gotten that exposition out of the way. So let's go ahead and play some more chess games. Okay. Let's refresh. Okay, here we go. Okay, so gonna take that. Ooh, okay. Probably gonna go take right there. And then I'm gonna go right here to block that mate. Oop, he's gonna go down here for sure. For sure. Or not. Okay. That actually was good for me, so that I can just go down here. It's perfect. Perfect. Okay. Go there. Can move that there. Okay. Check. Okay. Let's see what happens here. Okay. Let's go ahead and go here. All right. Go right there. I'm gonna probably move my rook back here or not. That kind of changed my plans. Right there. Okay, so what I was gonna do is take that knight. hopefully the king would stay in this place so that the pawn could take. But we're gonna do a new game since that worked out okay. Okay. Let's see here. Good. Well, yeah, true. I don't want him to mess with that too much. If I go right here, and if I check him there, it does nothing about it. I could probably get that queen, but he'll probably do something with the queen. Oh! Oh! Oh, that was actually mate. Okay. Okay. Nice. Okay. Queen takes. Mm. Mm. Gonna have to retreat. Ooh, I could just go here. And then I can go that up there. That there. Okay. There we go. All right, let's do another one. And then we'll get back to our instrumental music topic. Ooh, way to go right here. Okay. Check. Okay, take that. Okay. Go right here. Okay. Check. Okay. 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 All right. Back to our topic here. So we're going to keep on reading this right here. And once we finish this first part, once I make the next Chessemplation, we'll go ahead and fill in any commentary that we didn't get to in this episode. And then we'll read part 2 in the next one, in the next Chessemplation, until we're finished with all 3 parts. So let's go ahead and continue on where we left off. I can close that tab then. And we're going to go to, what else have you got? Okay. So, a cappella only person says, okay, I gotta concede, your historical argument, but your interpretation of Ephesians still seems pretty forced to me. So what else have you got? What's up, bro? Instrumental music guy says, I agree. I mean, I think it's right, but there's a better way to present the case. It's always better to reason from larger principles and try to avoid getting caught up in the Greek definitions and such. Not that Greek definitions are wrong, but you keep yourself from making mistakes if you consider the big picture first and foremost. Okay, we're in agreement, acapella only guy says. Instrumental music guy says, okay, I was reading N.T. Wright's Simply Christian the other day. Blah, blah, blah. And then acapella guy says, one of my favorite authors, by the way. I'm glad we agree. Anyway, N.T. Wright, who briefly I'll just say is not a Church of Christ dude. Wright speaks of the role of Christians in the church being to bring heaven closer to earth. The two won't be fully joined until the end, but until then, we're to work with God to bring them closer. The Bible begins with the Garden of Eden and ends with Revelation. In several passages, the Revelation speaks of heaven as the new Eden. For example, in Revelation 22, verses 2, 4, and 14, we're told the tree of life is in heaven. Well, if it's there, it was transplanted from Eden. Genesis 2:7, chapter 3, verses 22 and 24. This is proof texting. Although this is a sarcastic piece, the proof texting is here to show you what this background is like. After the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3, man was separated from God. Jesus came to undo the curse and began restoring the world to Eden. Romans 8:22 through 22 said, "For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up until the present time." And then also consider 1 Corinthians 15:21 through 26. "For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. But each in his own turn. Christ the firstfruits, then when he comes, those who belong to him. Then the end will come when he hands over the kingdom to God the Father after he has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet." Oh, that's a lot of he's. "The last enemy to be destroyed is death." You know all this. It's not controversial in most contexts, but here's my point. Heaven is the new Eden, the culmination of the work of Christ in redeeming not only mankind, but the whole creation itself. Therefore, when we read about heaven, we're seeing the end to which all Christians are to be working, which isn't to be saved, because we've already been saved, but to work as Christ's body on earth to help redeem a fallen creation. And when we read John's description of heaven in the Revelation, we read of God being worshipped with instruments. Acapella guy says, I know all that. This is just such an old, tired argument. It's true, but those instruments you're reading about there are symbolic. They're not tangible. It's a language borrowed from the kingdom of Israel. It no more means that we should worship with instruments than that we should use incense or other emblems of the old order. Maybe. Let's read the actual passages and see if your argument holds. Revelation 5:8. "And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Now here, the incense is said to be symbolic, but no such thing is said regarding the use of the harps to worship God. Why would incense be symbolic? Why would incense be the straightforward thing and harps be the symbolic one? It doesn't really check out. Revelation 14, 2-5. And I heard a sound from heaven, like the roar of rushing waters, and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. And this description of instrumental music is a characteristic of the totally pure and blameless. Pure, blameless. And this doesn't sound like a reference back to temple worship in the Old Testament. Revelation 15, 2-5. And I saw what looked like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and standing beside the sea, those who had been victorious over the beast and his image and over the number of his name. They held harps given them by God and sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. So this is supposed to be a song right here. I'm not going to sing it, but it's supposed to be a song. Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the ages. Who will not fear you, O Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. After this I looked, and in heaven the temple, that is, the tabernacle of the testimony, was opened. Now here, the harps were given by God to those worshiping him. So clearly the harps were approved by God. And while they sang the song of Moses, they also sang the song of the Lamb. So this is speaking of worship after Jesus' sacrifice. Verse 5, right here, this verse refers to the temple, but this is very Christian. Hebrews teaches that the true temple is in heaven. Because the temple is pictured as being in heaven, this is referring to Christian worship, not worship under the law of Moses. Revelation 18, 21-23. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea, and said, with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of harpists and musicians, flute players and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No workman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's great men. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. Now, the instrumental music guy who's still talking says, this passage is not speaking of worship at all. Rather, it's a curse on Babylon, generally thought of as symbolizing Rome. The curse announced for Babylon's sins is to never again hear instrumental music. The absence of instrumental music is a curse. Now, let's imagine that God truly wishes to never be worshipped with instruments following Jesus' death. Why on earth or in heaven would God inspire John to picture heaven this way? The heaven we are promised is a heaven where it's a curse to never hear instrumental music, and where God is worshipped with harps he himself made. this is the heaven that replaces our lost Eden. It's where man's relationship with God is perfect and sinless. There are certainly references back to Israel, as these were God's chosen people too, but the worship pictured in Revelation is not temple worship. There are no animal sacrifices in Revelation, only the Lamb's one sacrifice. Indeed, we're told that the purest and most blameless worship of God is with an instrument. A cappella only guy says, no, hold on. This is all about a different time and place. Maybe we will all have harps in heaven, but that hardly means we're supposed to use harps today. The a cappella only guy says, okay, instruments in the Old Testament were legal. And maybe in Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, maybe then instruments are made legal again. But why should we have instruments in this period between then and the past? Why can't we just do a cappella only? Instrumental music guy says, but recall the beginning of the argument. Heaven is Eden reborn. It's the kingdom fully realized. Sometimes the New Testament writers speak of the kingdom as having already come, Colossians 1:13, or as coming, Hebrews 12:28, or as not yet come, 2 Timothy 4:18. And it's all true. The kingdom was founded on Pentecost, but is not fully realized. Those in the kingdom are not yet fully yielded to their king, and most of the earth has yet to bow their knees to God at all. It's still coming, and won't be fully here until the end. But it's all the kingdom. We have the first fruits of heaven as part of our new lives as Christians, Romans 8:23, but not the fully realized kingdom. The Revelation teaches us what that reality will be like, and it pictures the saved as worshiping with instruments in a fully realized, perfect Eden restored kingdom. Heaven is not the fourth dispensation with new rules and laws. Heaven is already beginning to appear on earth and is coming. The church is already a part of this same kingdom. The kingdom is but a foretaste it is. We live today in the beginnings of heaven. Therefore, it would hardly make sense for God to picture his blameless saints as engaging in sinful activities. Do God's saints in heaven worship in vain? I think not. If they do the same thing here, do they worship in vain? No. They're just getting a head start on heaven. A cappella, the guy says. It's nicely worded. Clever even. But I think you're still confusing symbolic language with literal language. It's really an elementary mistake in hermeneutics. Instrumental music guy says, okay, I'll grant the symbolism. But notice that God approves instrumental music under the law of Moses, even honors it in the Psalms that command its use, and calls on Christians to speak to one another in these very same Psalms. He then shows us that the blameless before him will worship him in heaven with instruments. Perfect, blameless worship is conducted with instruments. Our present age has roots in the law of Moses and branches that reach into heaven. How could it possibly make sense for God to deny the use of instruments in an imperfect, only partly realized kingdom, and yet to command instruments in David's kingdom and in the kingdom of heaven fully realized? Surely, this gives you some pause. Isn't this the same God? A cappella only guy says, pause? Yeah, I guess. But if God really wants instruments in his worship, why not just say so? Why the silence? Instrumental music guy says, I would challenge your characterization of the message of the scriptures as silence. It seems pretty loud to me, but let's take this conversation in a different direction. Is it possible, do you think, that I'm right. Even if the odds are only 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, might I be right? Acapella only guy says, I really just don't see it, But yeah, you might be right. And if I'm right, then instrumental music might actually be commanded, right? No. It might be authorized, but hardly required. I think you're pressing too hard. Well, the Psalms command it. And the ad from the Christian Chronicle we've been discussing, it cites a passage, 2 Chronicles 29:25, saying God commanded instruments in the temple. And in Revelation, God actually gave the saints harps to worship with. Surely they'd have sinned had they refused to play. Okay, it's possible, not likely, remote even, but possible. I'll give you that. And so, what does the principle of safety say? According to this ad, when there is any doubt, we need to err on the side of obedience. If God just might maybe be commanding the use of instruments, then surely the safe thing would be to use them. Acapella only guy says, I think you've seriously misunderstood the argument. The argument is that we shouldn't use things where the authority for them is doubtful. And there's certainly some doubt as to your arguments. But don't you see the logic works both ways? I mean, if it's a question of what might be authorized but not commanded, then err on the side of caution. Don't do it. There's no sin in not doing it. But if it just might be commanded, then there's no safety in refusing the command. I mean, it's a command, for crying out loud. The safe course is to obey. Acapella only guy says, but both are true, aren't they? I mean, the authority for the instrument is unclear. Whether God actually desires instrumental music is unclear. The argument cuts both ways. Instrumental music guy says, you're right there. It does cut both ways, which means we have to toss the argument in the waste heap. Safety is simply beside the point. Acapella guy says, agreed, but I'm not sure where this leaves us. My head hurts. Let's meet again, but next time, I'm taking aspirin first. Agreed. At this point, instrumental music and acapella only begin debating who should pick up the check, and I woke up with my own headache. Maybe I got off the pain meds too soon. Okay, so we finished reading this article, and next time we're going to do this one. But at this point, you might be like, okay, what in the world have we talked about? I need a summary. So we just finished reading this first article in a series. We're talking about the instrumental music controversy particularly within Churches of Christ. And I'm reading from this set of articles to provoke thought. And I'm trying to do so very, very carefully. And I push back on Jay Gwynn every now and then in how sarcastic he sometimes says things. But to be fair, it's a sarcastic piece. But at any rate, to sum up that whole chunk that I just read, there's often an argument that, yeah, in the Old Testament, God commanded using musical instruments in addition to the human voice as part of worshiping God's self. But then, because of calling on this regulative principle, Church of Christ folks tend to say, well, even if there's instrumental music as part of worship later in heaven, why should we have any instrumental music now? And Jake Wynn was responding to that, saying, okay, how say like erring on the side of caution is beside the point. What we're trying to figure out is big picture inconsistency. If God was for instrumental music then and later, stand to figure nothing much changes in the interim. And yet, some people will still insist that because there's such scant mention of instrumental music in the New Testament, that therefore means it's not legal. And this is an example issue. There are so many more issues we could talk about. And if people are listening to this who didn't grow up in any form of Christianity, and you're like, what are we talking about? I know, it's a lot. It's a whole lot. But I think it's important to see how these arguments play out if we're going to, if like somebody who is more progressive is going to have a conversation with a more conservative person. Kind of need to know how a conservative mind works. And vice versa. If you're conservative and you want to have a conversation that's actually meaningful with a progressive person, you're going to want to listen to them and learn from them and love them. This is why I called this episode, "Oh Logic, Do I See All Ways?" If I'm just seeing it my way, I'm being the very annoying kind of selfish. But if I'm seeing things in a circumspect way, then I'm including as many factors as possible, as many people as possible. So the chances of my having a fairer and more loving perspective is increased. So I think it's very, very important to be circumspect. We're gonna close out with some chess games. But before we do that, here are some recommended resources for biblical studies. For older stuff, I would suggest going to New Advent, or Christian Classics at the Real Library, or even sacredtext.com. And the benefit of going to any of these sites is that you can access texts that are very important to the history of Christianity. I would also suggest looking at the Bible for Normal People. Really great scholars who invite other scholars to talk about very important issues. I would also suggest checking out this series from Paradox Church on biblical contradictions. I think it's extremely helpful and well put together. Likewise, I would check out these videos right here. Furthermore, Mr. Michael Patton has some very, very good resources, which Bible.org hosts to this day. If you go to the theology program, and you go to the section on bibliology and hermeneutics, he talks about this. I'll highlight this. He talks about this threefold process of this adventure of approaching the Bible. In the last episode, I misspoke one word, so I clarify it here. He talks about exegesis, which is, and you can apply this to looking at any work of art. Try to figure out, what did this text or what did this piece of art mean to people back when it was crafted originally? Then you want to ask, how does this text or this piece of art apply to all audiences of all times? And then you want to ask the homiletic question, what does this text or this piece of art have to do with me and my position in the cosmos? So yeah, I'd highly recommend those resources. Let's go ahead and play some chess games before I very formally conclude this episode. And then, yeah. And I'll have to end it before too long anyway, for my battery's sake. Okay, so let's get back into chess. And let's play. Ooh, okay. Let's do another one. Probably pawn there. I also kind of want to kick that knight out of its spot, so... Probably go back there. That's its... Well, could also go to that spot too, I suppose. I'm thinking about taking this with my rook. Checking. Let's see. Oh, that was a big mistake. Oh, he can take my queen. Ha! Oh boy. Well. Okay. Well, I won that by the skin of my teeth. Okay. Let's do another one. I can keep putting pressure on that spot. That would be good. If I take here, he can't take with his pawn because there's that. Hidden check. do a new one. Nope. But you know what I can do? I can go here. And then see how I do with this game. Then I might wrap up. Because my battery is perilously close to dying. Okie dokie. Shh. Cool. I think I got up to close to 12,000, maybe. Let's see. I got 20% to work with. Okay. So Oh wait, hold on. No, I didn't make it to 12,000. I made it close to 1160. Okay, well, rounding up, that's pretty close. 1200. I need to get back up to 1500. Goodness. Yeah. Then 1600, then 1700, then 1800. Okay. All right. Cool. So, to conclude this episode, as always, I'd like us to open up to wonder. If you've come from Churches of Christ or some related tradition, I'd like to ask, what do you think? Is there one biblical canon? You can, again, take a look at my previous work via sources like here. I've used 43 pages and tried to cross-reference a lot of sources to improve my mental map of how different Christian traditions believe the books of the Bible are composed. How many books of the Bible are there? In what order are they? And so on. So I recommend maybe checking out this resource. And I want to ask, not just with regard to the Bible, but any text, can you count on there being like one straightforward way to interpret anything? Or can you say that you just interpret texts in a roundabout way? Or is interpretation usually more a complex affair than just being literal or figurative? Could it be that you have both packed into tons of sources? And if that's the case, how do you navigate all of those different meanings every single day? Goodness, it's hard being a human being, isn't it? This last resource here, Medieval Meditation Methods, is something that I concocted way back when. Probably the most relevant parts for anyone to read are actually toward the end. And you're probably like, why? And I'm like, well, I really like context, if you can't tell. So this is a proposed way to go about specifically biblical interpretation, but it doesn't have to just be about the Bible, I suppose. Start out with the historical sense. You have lower criticism and higher criticism, which ask different questions. Then you've got these different things pertaining to the history of a text. And then at the end, you want to ask, how does this apply to me? And often before you ask that question, you have to ask other questions like, what are the symbols in this text? What are what's the moral of this story? What's the goal of a text in general? So, at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and press these buttons that I should have pressed earlier. I meant to press the welcome button earlier. I meant to press the please like, subscribe, and share and comment button, which I didn't. And now I'm going to share this. Thank you for being you, and thank you for listening. Whether you came in for a minute or somehow listened to this whole thing, thank you for being you, and thank you for listening. It's been fun. Probably boring to some people. Maybe this made you fall asleep. Well, no matter how or when you listen to this, thank you for being you. I can't say that enough. You are precious because you exist, and I hope that we can all learn to listen, learn, and love. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this up now. I plan to continue my literary criticism series. If I don't get to that tomorrow, I've got other things in store. I need to resume my grilling series and release more music and just keep at it. So, again, thank you for tuning in. Take care.